If college football is turning into the NFL, where recruiting is like drafting and the transfer portal is like free agency and NIL is, well, it's money being paid to players. So if college football is turning into the NFL, should college football coaches be getting the same criticism as NFL head coaches?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, and you can also check us out on YouTube. So subscribe to the YouTube page. You'll get notified as soon as new episodes of Locked On LSU drop. But however you listen, wherever you listen, always just appreciate you for being here. My everydayers, welcome back. Thanks for supporting the podcast. And if you're new, then welcome. Happy to have you here. Before we get into kind of some continued commentary on Brian Kelly's comments with Jacques Doucet of WFB, I got to let y'all know that today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. So as we all as LSU fans probably know by now, even non-LSU fans, if you are plugged into college football in just the teeniest, tiniest bit, you have probably heard Brian Kelly's comments that he made when he sat down with Jacques Doucet of WAFB. It was a long sit down, nearly 30 minutes, talking about Harold Perkins, talking about what LSU is returning this season, kind of reflecting on this past year. And the quote that went viral, and I'm not going to bore you with it because you probably already heard it, is, "We're not in the market of buying players," which of course went viral. And there's been a ton of subsequent reaction and commentary on social media. I've been doing it on radio shows. I've been hearing it on other shows. I've been reading it in articles. And I think it's all really interesting commentary, especially now that we're in an age of college football and of college sports in general, where NIL is in its infancy, where this version of the transfer portal is new. That the new formula, or if there even is a new formula for winning championships in college football, is still to be determined. But I've heard a lot of commentary in today's podcast. I kind of want to get into that commentary from national writers, commentary that you have posted here on the podcast. I want to start first with an article from Connor O'Gara of Saturday Down South. Now, let me start this by saying I love Connor. I respect the heck out of Connor, and I love his work, and I really enjoy talking with Connor. And he wrote a really, very thoughtful, insightful breakdown, his thoughts of what Brian Kelly said to Jacques Doucet. Again, if you haven't heard it, highly, highly recommend that you give it a listen in its entirety. But Connor was giving his commentary about how there might be a little bit of hypocrisy in what Brian Kelly said. And if we're going to start, or not but if college football is going to start reflecting the NFL more and more and more, which it is. Recruiting is drafting. Transfer portal is free agency. And you just go wherever the highest bidder is going to pay you. So shouldn't we be criticizing college football coaches the same way that we're criticizing NFL coaches? So this is what Connor writes. It says, if the transfer portal in college football as a whole has become free agency, think of it this way. If the New Orleans Saints hosted some big-time free agents on a visit, but then missed out, picture Coach Dennis Allen getting in front of a microphone and saying that, yeah, the guys we wanted just didn't buy into our culture and they went elsewhere because they got better offers. He'd get blasted 6 ways to Sunday for a comment like that. Adding to the vitriol would be the fact that Allen isn't Sean Payton, who won a Super Bowl. Don't think Dennis Allen will ever get to that point either, but that's a different story for a different day about a different team. And it's a very fair point, because myself as a Saints fan, I would be like, what do you mean, Dennis? What do you mean they're not buying into the culture? Pay him the money, bring him in here, and let's get closer to winning a Super Bowl. So I understand that might be a little bit of hypocrisy in there. But let's highlight the major differences between college football and the NFL if we're going to compare the two. Because yes, there are more similarities between the two sports and leagues than there ever have been before. But let's not ignore the fact that there are certain rules, regulations, barometers that the NFL has that college football doesn't. The NFL has a players union. That players union negotiates a collective bargaining agreement, rules that the players and the owners agree to, guidelines, parameters to make sure that this is a fair marketplace, to make sure that we are all abiding under very similar rules, regulations, and bubbles, so to speak. College football does not have that. The NFL has a salary cap, and albeit the salary cap is incredibly fluid and you can manipulate it however you want, again, to bring the Saints back into this, Mickey Loomis is a master cap manipulator, but still, the cap still exists. There is a marketplace and a market value for individual positions. You're not going to go out and sign a free agent receiver to a deal worth $45 million a year. Why would you do that? That's not the market for a receiver. You would do that, however, if a high-end starting quarterback became available in the free agent market, because that's the market value. College football has no salary cap. College football, the money can come from wherever and go wherever, however they want it to. In college football, there's just a marketplace in general. There's no market value for a going wide receiver or a going rate for a defensive tackle like LSU has been looking for. No, the defensive tackle can say, I want $2 million. And if you're not going to offer that to me, I'm not going there. Now, on the other hand, if a defensive tackle in the NFL went up to a general manager and said, I want $50 million a year, that general manager would laugh him out of the room because that's not the market value for that position. So I understand the parallels and I get it. And he's not wrong in saying that. But let's acknowledge the differences because those barometers and those guidelines, those restrictions exist in the NFL and they exist for everyone. What Brian Kelly is doing is trying to create those own restrictions within his own locker room. And when I say restrictions, I don't mean that Brian Kelly is tightening up the budget and only allocating a few funds here and there. That's not what I'm saying. We know that LSU is not afraid to deep dive into the NIL space. But what Brian Kelly is saying is, look, if the market is not going to set a value for these transfer portal players, then I have to set a market for myself based on the locker room. What he said about some players that are in the locker room, and I believe he's alluding to Will Campbell and Emory Jones, 3-year starters that are homegrown, committed to LSU out of high school, have stuck at LSU all 3 years, and have been incredibly important foundations for the number one offense in the country last year, and what we assume to be a pretty damn good one this upcoming season. I think that was eye-opening for Brian Kelly to say, look, how can I justify spending, let me just pull a random number out here, a 7-figure salary to a defensive tackle that hasn't given me that same dedication that these other players have that aren't making that same kind of price tag. So look, again, I will acknowledge that that might be the wrong approach. But to compare it to the NFL, I don't think is fair because it's not a perfect comparison. That if Dennis Allen and Mickey Loomis and and Mrs. Benson don't want to open up the checkbook, then that's a different story than Brian Kelly not paying a certain player what he doesn't think he deserves. It's different. It's different when you're working in the wild, wild west versus in a collective bargaining agreement. But I want to continue to get into commentary on what Brian Kelly had to say. Look, anyone's opinions are totally fair and justified. I want to get into your thoughts, questions, comments, concerns about what Brian Kelly had to say, because I got a flood of DMs of questions and comments of a lot of you listeners that just wanted to talk about it. And this is the space for that. So we'll continue this conversation and get into your comments, questions, and concerns on this Mailbag Thursday here on Locked On LSU after just a couple of words from our sponsors. Okay, I want to tell you about Yahoo Finance. So wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub. and you can access the expert analysis that you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. I've been using Yahoo Finance to consolidate all of my accounts in one place, which has made it incredibly easy to manage them, which has been really nice for me, somebody that gets intimidated by finances, somebody who can easily get disorganized, especially when I have all different accounts in all these different places. Yahoo Finance makes it so easy for me. And when it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. So now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses. It's Yahoo Finance. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. It's a comprehensive perspective, and it's what sets apart great investors. It's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. There's a community of over 90 million users each month, so the real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination, that's yahoofinance.com. Once again, yahoofinance.com. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Rolling along here, getting into some of your commentary on Brian Kelly's comments about NIL, not quote unquote being in the market for buying players. Great sit down that he had with Jacques Doucet of WFB 9 Sports. Well, I had a bunch of these along the same lines of this question. And this is also conversations that I had this morning with people that had very similar sentiments and very similar questions. Essentially, the question is, how are recruits and players in the transfer portal going to interpret what Brian Kelly had to say? That if you were a transfer portal player that was considering LSU, or you were a recruit that was considering LSU, and you want to cash in on NIL, what's stopping you from just crossing LSU off of your list? Because how you interpreted Brian Kelly's comments was, we're not going to pay players. Again, that's not what Brian Kelly said. And again, we know that that's not true. We know that a lot of players at LSU, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, women's basketball, gymnastics, hello, Livy Dunn, that there are wonderful NIL opportunities at LSU. But it's a fair question. If I'm 16, 17, 18 years old, I'm a 4-star, 5-star, and I realize my worth in NIL, that I can make a 6-7 figure salary in college. Would Brian Kelly's comments make me feel confident that LSU is the best place for me to capitalize on my NIL opportunities? Fair question. I don't know how that's going to make them feel. And if you are getting recruited by LSU, I have to imagine that those conversations are already going on. And if you're already having those conversations, then you're not going to be fearful of not being able to capitalize on NIL, because you're already having conversations about NIL. Hell, you might even already be earning NIL, depending on which state you go in high school in. My rebuttal to that is, but how do the players in the locker room feel about that? Because Brian Kelly's comments to me were a direct reflection of how he feels about that locker room. And I mean that in the most positive way. That he's essentially saying, I got you. Guys in the locker room, guys that are committed to this program, guys that are bought into this message, guys that are here at LSU because they want to wear this uniform and they want to represent LSU, I got you. That is more important to me than anyone else who's looking for a payday. So I look at it that way. That how do the guys in the locker room interpret what Brian Kelly said? And if you're Will Campbell, if you're Emory Jones, aren't you thinking, damn, thanks, coach? Now, again, I acknowledge in this era of college football, maybe age-old tradition and classic college football dream of playing at LSU because you've always dreamed of playing at LSU. You commit to LSU because it's been your childhood dream to wear the purple and gold. Like, maybe that's dead. Maybe that's not what 16, 17, 18-year-old kids are looking for anymore. Maybe it's an antiquated way of thinking. And maybe it could ultimately be the demise for Brian Kelly and his career at LSU. I'm not saying that that's not an absolute possibility. But I'm also not going to say definitively that that's going to be the case. That we don't know what the formula to championships is. We don't. Who won the national championship last year? It was Michigan. It wasn't necessarily a roster packed with transfers. Of course, you want to supplement through the transfer portal. That's what LSU is doing. Like, the perception that Brian Kelly's going full Dabo, who, I don't know if y'all seen this, but this made me absolutely, like, laugh out loud laughing. 4 schools that did not take a single transfer in the 2024 period. So including fall and spring. 4 schools: Army, Navy, Air Force, Clemson. Like, one of those does not belong. Brian Kelly's not going full on Dabo. Let's not act like that. Like, LSU brought in a decent number of transfer portal players at positions of need. It is very much so a more conservative approach than, let's say, a Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. We'll see. We'll see what works. And we're not going to know the answer to that of, quote unquote, what works after this season. We don't have enough of a sample size. We're only a couple of years into this. So buckle up, because I don't think it's going to get much easier anytime soon. I don't think that we're going to have any kind of rules, regulations, or answers to a lot of the questions that we have anytime soon. More of your questions, more of your comments, more of your concerns coming up next after just a couple of words from our sponsors. I want to tell you about FanDuel. So it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. I'm looking at the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Canucks and Oilers played last night. The Oilers were up, and then they blew their lead, lost the Canucks 5-4. So I'm looking at taking the Edmonton Oilers in game 2. Connor McDavid did not tally a single shot last night. Not a single shot against the Vancouver Canucks. I don't think that that's going to be the norm with this series. I don't think that the Oilers were able to fall asleep at night with a good taste in their mouths after blowing that lead. So I'm going to take the Oilers to come back with a vengeance and tie that series up 1-1 in game 2. But hey, that's my take. Do it however you want to do it. Just do it with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Back into your comments and kind of thoughts on what Brian Kelly had to say with Jacques Doucet. There was one commenter that said that it's not a question. I just wanted to kind of address it. And I responded to it on YouTube. I just wanted to address it here. This was a big commentary that I saw on social media. A lot of it coming from Oklahoma fans or Miami fans or fans of programs that landed the D linemen that LSU was targeting in the transfer portal. Of course, we know Dominic Williams is the defensive lineman that LSU targeted via the transfer portal from TCU. He's heading to Oklahoma. Simeon Barrow from Michigan State, he's headed to Miami. One commenter on YouTube says, it's remarkable hypocrisy. Everyone outside of the program and probably many inside know that this is sour grapes. You lost a close recruiting battle, and now you're making excuses. Like, maybe. But I like that might be the case. It very well could be the case. I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly what the conversations were behind closed doors. I don't know what these defensive linemen were asking for a fact. I have heard reports. I have heard rumblings, but I don't know. And I don't know what LSU was willing to offer or not willing to offer. Sure, yeah, maybe that's the case. Could be. I find it very odd if it would be, because it's not like this was the first recruiting battle that Brian Kelly's ever lost out on. And it's not going to be the last. You don't land every recruit that you recruit. You don't land every player in the transfer portal. That's ridiculous. When have we ever heard Brian Kelly have quote unquote sour grapes about missing out on a player and just making up some story about NIL just to cover his tracks? Look, again, maybe that's the case. Could be. But I find it very hard to believe that Brian Kelly would go pouting after missing out on a few players, because it has happened before. It's going to happen again. That's the difficulty of recruiting, that you can do everything in your power to land a player. And sometimes that player just doesn't want to go there. That you can do whatever you possibly can within reason. And they still want something else that you can't or aren't willing to offer. Like, that's recruiting. Welcome to the life of a college coach. So I can't get completely on board with it's just sour grapes. I can't get on board with that, frankly, but maybe it is. Honestly, who knows? I want to get into some more of these questions. One commenter says, I blame all of this NIL stuff on the NCAA. They could have set some sort of guidelines and or rules in place concerning NIL, but they didn't. I totally agree. Like, the NCAA knew that this was coming. The NCAA could have worked with Congress instead of working against it and ignoring it. They could have worked with Congress to try to come up with constitutional rules and regulations to make sure that NIL wouldn't be just this completely lawless area. The NCAA could have done that. They could have been proactive and acknowledged, look, the old way of thinking, the old NCAA, that's gone. And she ain't come back anytime soon. That we're entering this new age. So let's buckle up and let's figure out the best way to help student athletes, because that is what the NCAA is supposed to be there for, right? Helping the student athletes, providing student athlete support. That's the point, right? It's weird how they don't always do that. So I agree. The NCAA could have done something proactively to eliminate the issues that we're experiencing now. But that's not going to happen. Like, the cat's out of the bag, the toothpaste out of the tube, whatever analogy that you want to use. We can't cry over what the NCAA didn't do, because now that we're in this place, there's no going back. The tricky thing for me too is we can say, well, there needs to be a cap. There needs to be regulations. Okay, how? Because the Supreme Court very clearly and just very clearly stated, you can't put a cap on NIL because that's anti-capitalist. That you cannot limit what a certain player can make on the free and open market. That's what NIL is. I mean, it's now turned into recruiting inducements. It's now turned into pay for play. But at its core, NIL is name, image, and likeness. Can't stop Patrick Mahomes from doing State Farm commercials just because he's making $40 million in the NFL. It's not how that works. So can't do a salary cap without a players union and a collective bargaining agreement. Well, if you have a players union and a collective bargaining agreement, you're no longer students. You are employees. And then that opens a completely different avenue of, if you're employees, are you entitled to health insurance from the university? If you're employees, are you entitled to revenue sharing from all of the money that's coming in from these TV deals? If you are entitled to revenue sharing, then where is the money? Is there any money left over to fund softball or track and field? I mean, if it's all being divvied up amongst the players, that's money that funds not just the football program, but sports in general. So will that do away with Title IX? See what I mean? That when we try to solve some of these NIL problems, it's really easy to say, well, cap. Okay. But if you try to solve that problem, it opens up a completely new door for other problems. Frankly, problems that sound much bigger than the problems that we're experiencing now. It's a total incomplete mess. It's a total mess. I don't see it changing anytime soon. So you adapt or you die. I don't agree with the fact that Brian Kelly's quote unquote not adapting with the times, because he's embracing NIL. He's just placing his own parameters on it. Now, does that cost LSU football in the long run? Maybe. Will that cost LSU in the short term? It already did, because you don't have a defensive tackle. And your defense is going to suffer for it. And your team is going to suffer for it. So even though I agree with Brian Kelly's comments, you still don't have a defensive tackle. Like, that's still a problem that exists. It's been really fun, honestly, seeing all of the responses to this, how this has opened up a completely different conversation about college football coaches and their approach and, the formula for championships. It's been an absolute blast. So we'll continue the commentary throughout the week. Also, Paul Skeens got called up. He will make his major league debut on Saturday in Pittsburgh. They're taking on the Chicago Cubs. So we'll get into that on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.